Good evening, Nubian gods and goddesses. I am Empress Wahid, and I am listening to No Copyright, my podcast music, Chill Lo-Fi. And I am going to try and get through this particular section of Group Identity and Political Change by Harold R. Isaacs because I just can't wait to get to the next section. So I'm going to get right in. In a memorable cartoon some years ago, Peter Arnold drew a drunk pounding his fist on a bar and proclaiming, "I hate everybody, regardless of race, creed, or color." This was brought to mind by a passage in a newspaper article soon after the June 1965 coup in Algeria. This The Egyptians saw the Algerians as somewhat boorish upstarts who lacked national traditions. "If I had known what these people were like," said an Egyptian doctor working in Oran to a friend, "I would have been against their independence." Algerians, for their part, spoke privately of Egyptians as haughty and overbearing. This mutual view among friends illustrates again that neither kinship nor common creed nor ideological or political bonds can keep people from despising one another. Besides being full of venom against the ex-dominant Europeans, lighter-skinned Algerians and lighter-skinned Egyptians also share feelings of superiority over their darker-skinned compatriots, and, by all accounts, something closer to contempt for their black African counterparts. South of the Sahara. In isolating here some of the evidences of the new upcroppings of racial antipathies, I do not mean to suggest that racial differences are the only or even the main reasons for the general absence of brotherly love, but simply to point out that they are also present and have their own peculiar and important part in this common human condition. What is new, or rather newly apparent, is the extent to which the race or color issue has shown its presence in the non-white world. It appears with varying intensity along the entire color spectrum, among all shades of men who have attached values to lightness and darkness of skin in almost every culture and place. These attitudes were submerged for a long time in the common subordination of all non-whites to the whites. Now that non-whites have regained political power and the mantle of white supremacy has been removed, many of these older designs are coming into view again, either in the forms they had long possessed or in new forms created by the new circumstances. We are becoming more and more aware of the many ways in which people outraged by the superiority patterns imposed on them by the whites now impose similarly based or baseless patterns of their own on the many shades of color differences among themselves. This is partly a legacy from the era of white domination, though just how large a part it is difficult to say. Submission to total white power led people of many different kinds to internalize, to accept as true the myths of white superiority. In sections of virtually every society and culture over which white men made themselves masters during the last 200 or 300 years, non-white people adopted the going white standards of beauty and value. And some of that, see, it was imposed upon you. Black women had to straighten their hair to conform to the white standard of beauty in order to obtain employment to take care of her family. White supremacy said she had to do this. So then she became creative and the relaxer was born. See, it's not like we did this because we wanted to. Hence, we have the Crown Act. I urge you to do your research on the Crown Act, which had to be put into place as a law that will allow black women, black men, but mainly it was imposed, this was black women, to be able to wear your hair in the workplace any way you see fit in its natural form. Wow. This yearning after whiteness produced color case systems with whiteness or lightness at the top and blackness or darkness at the bottom. Although black men in the Americas were perhaps most deeply damaged by this process, they shared its deformities with people in every part of the world where white domination was practiced in its various styles by the aloof British, the more supple French, the tepidly paternalistic Dutch, and the remarkably literal Spanish. The colonial color bar generally operated through strong but informally maintained codes. But in Spain's colonies, the higher status of whiteness was doled out in precise degrees by law, with explicit distinctions in the legal rights assigned to each fractional measure of whiteness. The half-caste, or mixed bloods, rose to a unique degree to the top of the local colonial social scale in Spain's dominions, including the Philippines. They fell just under the pure Spaniards, locally born and home-born in that order, instead of falling into the limbo that mixed bloods came to occupy in the colonies of Britain, France, and to a slightly less extent, Holland. In all its forms, the weight of this part of the legacy of European rule lies heavily on all ex-colonial societies today. The yearning after whiteness that stems from the era of white dominion persists in the form of color-cased attitudes still strongly held by people in the ex-colonies, not only among the elite, but among the masses as well. This makes it relatively easy for some ex-colonial subjects to hold white ex-rulers responsible for the patterns of racialism that have now come into view among them. This view is more valid in some instances than in others. Among Filipinos, for example, there is an almost obsessive preoccupation with color and physical characteristics. It appears in almost every aspect of everyday family life, in dating and mating, in the raising of children, and at every point of contact between people of varying groups and kinds in the population. The most relevant words and the long string of vernacular equivalents or variations crop up with great frequency. Fair-skinned, dark-skinned, high nose, low nose, chinky eyes. Where this preoccupation fits into the patterns of Filipino group identity is not easily or precisely fixed. Bits of evidence suggest the presence long ago of high value on light skin color among the brown skinned Malay peoples from whom the modern Filipinos are derived. This is now laced into a fine and complex mesh into all the ways Filipinos have of perceiving their ethnic and cultural mixes, their Malay, Chinese, Spanish, and American layerings, and the ways in which these get expressed in their regionalisms, social relations, languages, religion, national consciousness, and political style. Filipinos inherit their attitudes about skin color from every part of their past. These attitudes are incorporated in what they have become and must be included in whatever definition they will now make of the meaning of being Filipino. In quite a different form, the responsibility of the colonial rulers for new racial conflicts in some ex-colonies is especially plain in situations the Europeans actually created in the first place. One example is the confrontation in Malaysia between Malays and Chinese, most of whom are there because Chinese were brought in as contract laborers to work in British mines. Another is the collision in Guyana between descendants of Africans brought to the colony in British slave ships and descendants of East Indians brought in also by the British as indentured laborers. Similar or related examples of European created situations can be found in Trinidad and Fiji and in African countries like Sierra Leone or Gambia, where Creole minorities have become the new ruling classes over masses still mainly black. This is the end of that section for group identity and political change. Well, I have a couple of more sections in this part, and it's starting to gear towards Africa. So, please, if you haven't been able to follow along from the beginning, please go back and listen to some of the videos before up to this point. The relevancy, I can't even explain to you how relevant this book is, even though it's from the 60s. What interested me in the book was how in depth it talks about the birth of all of these racial situations created by the European that we have to this day. I always read the book exactly as the author has written it. I don't add to or take from unless I have a comment. And just like I had the comment about the Crown Act, it never ceases to amaze me. But yet we have cultural appropriation. There's a difference between having to do something and then wanting to mimic someone. And I always tell people there's a difference between mockery and there's a difference between mocking someone and having liking what like something like what they wear or something like that. You know, cultural appropriation is like you're mocking someone. You're not giving appreciation to it, you know. So a lot of people get that twisted, you know. Well, I am the only Nubian goddess in the living room tonight, and I think I'm gonna call it a night, and I'm gonna get through this book, this section, because curiosity kills the cat, the black cat. Peace, love, and light. Hotel.